Thank you, Brian. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Wall Street investment bank Goldman Sachs with civil fraud last week. It has denied the charge. Now, joining us now to make sense of it all is Nick Bontis, an award-winning professor from the DeGroote School of Business. Always nice to have you with us. Thank you, Nick.
Happy Friday, Taz.
Thank you so much. Now, in very simple terms, what does this mean? What does this alleged charge involve?
Let's break it down in simple terms, Taz. Imagine that I sell you insurance for your home.
Okay.
And then 2 days later, I go and commit arson and burn it down. And there's a benefit or a proceed to nobody, to me, of the policy, without anybody knowing that this is going on. That, in a sense, is what happened.
Okay.
We have this organization, Goldman Sachs, the prince of Wall Street, who is now purchasing certain investment vehicles related to debt, but at the same time, they're in cahoots with another organization who is making a bet that those debt securities are going to fall down in price. Frankly, this smacks of unbelievable fraud. The Securities Exchange Commission is going to come down really hard on Goldman Sachs, in my estimation, and they're going to make an example of them on Wall Street.
Do you think there'll be other banks and financial institutions that follow?
Yeah, this could in effect be analogous to what's happening with Toyota, Taz. You know, nail Toyota because they're the kingpin auto manufacturer of the world, and watch the other organizations follow suit.
Well, the U.S. president is trying to crack down, and he's announced these bills pushing for Wall Street reforms. He claims it's in the best interest of the country and the financial institutions. Would you agree? Is more regulation a good or a bad thing for the markets?
So I can't believe I'm saying this, Taz, but more regulation is actually good in this case, because all we have to do is look at our own banks here in Canada. You know, we basically came out of this thing unscathed, and the reason is because the Canadian banks are better capitalized. We have tighter regulations here in this particular market. So, you know, I think what Obama is doing for the first time is looking north of the 49th border and saying, hey, let's do a little bit of what Canada is doing because their banks survived pretty well.
Well, I mean, it's very clear that he's already facing some opposition from those big bankers that have already started to protest. How much trouble is it going to be to try to push this bill through?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of trouble. I mean, a lot of the Republicans, especially the capitalists, you know, they're into free markets. So less government is better government. And unfortunately, when you're trying to regulate the big banks, you're asking for more government. So although Obama, I think, has his heart in the right place, I just don't think it's going to go through.
You don't, Well, he got health care through, so you never know.
You never know.
Well, considering that the U.S. government spent like $700 billion bailing out the financial markets, doesn't it have a right now to say, listen, we bailed you out, now try things our way?
I think they do, and that's the argument that Obama is going to use. Obviously, there's talk in the international financial markets as well about a bank tax, and it's the same situation. What they're trying to do is they're trying to come up with this little kitty, this little slush fund in a sense, so that if there's any future problems, you know, we have the cash to actually bail some of these organizations out, so that it's not the taxpayer that's bailing them out. Unfortunately, it's very, very tough to actually go tell a bank, hey, in addition to the profits that you owe the shareholders, oh, by the way, pay this little extra tax as well, just in case you become a bad corporate citizen. So it's going to be tough slogging. In principle, I like the idea, but I think tough slogging in the American marketplace.
Now, there is also the argument that by having that slush fund, as you call it, it's kind of giving those banks the right to perform recklessly and go ahead and do what they want because they know that there's that safety net underneath.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Taz. It's the philosophy of that safety net that I think is going to actually turn to cause this particular initiative to kind of drop down.
Flaherty's already said he's not going to stand by this, even though the IMF is given their stamp of approval. Is it the right thing for Canada to do, to stand alone amongst G20 leaders? Well,
Flaherty's right to stand down and not agree, and the reason being is because the Canadian financial services marketplace, our big banks in Canada, are already doing the right thing. They already have a wonderfully regulated marketplace, but they're also competitive on a global scale. So we don't need to add an extra tax on top of our Canadian banks. It's the Canadian banks that are showing the way for all the other banks around the world.
And we should point out that had that tax been in place, the proposed tax, when the financial market started to melt down, a lot of our taxpayer money would have been helping out our brothers and sisters to the south of us. All right, well, you raised a really interesting point last week, and that was about importing a car from the States and how much money you can save, because a lot of people are wondering, the loonies at par, but the prices haven't come down, and they're still looking south of the border to get those deals. There's some deals to be had. And you know firsthand.
And I know firsthand because my family has actually imported 2 vehicles from the U.S. So let me break it down for everybody. It's not that complicated. Don't be fearful. There's some very, very simple steps that you need to go through. The first place that you need to go to is a website that gives you all the resource information you need. It's riv.ca. You see there on the screen. They'll be able to provide you a list of all the vehicles that are actually eligible by Transport Canada to be imported into Canada from the U.S. In terms of the things you have to keep an eye out for, first of all, you have to make sure that the vehicle that you're looking at has anchor seats for the children, because we have those in Canada. Most of the cars in the U.S. have those, so you have to double check on that. Second thing is you have to have daytime running lights. Now that's the big one. And those daytime running lights actually have to be installed correctly in the U.S. before you actually bring the car over the border.
Really?
But it's not that complicated. A mechanic can typically do it for a very little amount of money. The other thing that's very, very important is the dial on the speedometer. It has to read kilometers per hour. Most North American vehicles have miles per hour and kilometers per hour, so that's not a big deal. And the final thing is the bumper. Most automobiles have the bumper standards that allow for low kilometer speed collisions in Canada and in the US. So once you confirm all of those, and a lot of the RIV call center people can answer those questions for you, it's just a matter of economics. So here's the wonderful thing about economics. For, let's say, a $25,000 van, a minivan in Canada, in the US, that same minivan can be had for $20,000. A $5,000 savings.
That's 20%.
That's 20%.
Yeah.
As the price of the vehicle increases, Taz, the savings can be greater. My dad imported a Lexus. The Lexus cost $40,000 here. In the U.S., it was $28,000.
That's a huge savings.
My wife imported a Lincoln Navigator SUV. It was $43,000 to import it. Relatively new, 8,000 kilometers on it, cost about $80,000 to buy that sucker here.
That's after all the taxes and the duties
all
and
the taxes,
else.
That's right. And the way the taxes work is, as soon as the car gets to the border, you pay GST, and then as soon as you bring the car into your town, you take it to a local Canadian Tire who does the testing, and the Canadian Tire gives you a stamp of approval. You go to the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario to get your sticker, and when you get your sticker, that's when you pay the PST.
So this can be done in an afternoon.
That's correct. I mean,
feasibly.
There's research to be done. There's a lot of people to help you on the web as well. It's not complicated, so I urge all the viewers, if they're very interested, without any pain at all, go to 2 websites, and these are 2 websites I recommend: autotrader.ca, autotrader.com. Check the same vehicle in the Canadian price and the same vehicle in the U.S. price. If there's a big difference, then do more research if you're interested.
One quick question. Are we talking about used cars or are we talking about new cars?
Excellent point. These are typically all used cars, Taz, and the reason for that is no dealer in a cross-border town will sell you a new car as a Canadian. And the reason for that is because they don't want to offend their sister dealer. So for example, a Chevrolet dealer in Buffalo doesn't want to offend the Chevrolet dealer in Niagara Falls, so they basically come up with this collusionary pact to say we will not sell new cars to Canadians, but you can still buy a demo vehicle which is almost as new.
What if you were willing to drive the car a little bit further and go a little further stateside?
And that's what we did. So actually the 2 vehicles that we imported were actually from New Jersey, which is a little further away, so you know there's less Canadian traffic in that particular case.
Okay. You have an iPad with you, I notice.
Right. That's
We've
right.
been talking about that a lot, and of course that has been selling out in the States, and the release date here in Canada has been pushed back by a month. So you're saying there are ways that you can get your hot hands on these?
There's a very simple way to get your hot hands on an iPad. You don't have to drive to Buffalo to buy it from the Apple Store. You can just go on eBay. In fact, on eBay today, I saw a brand new iPad available for sale to a Canadian for $520. Now, $520 compares quite favorably to the $499 you would pay retail in Buffalo. In this particular iPad that you see on the screen right now is actually in Mississauga, so it's not too far away. So the prices are coming down.
You don't even have to drive very far.
No.
So $520 is the current price.
That's correct.
As of maybe 10 minutes ago when we last checked. Okay. How do you feel about the iPad now that you've tooled around with it? Is it a hit or a miss in your mind?
Well, this one is actually my student's, Kunal, so Kunal let me borrow it for the day, and I'm actually getting used to it. It's got a nice feel to it. The screen is gorgeous. It's very, very bright.
Right.
All the applications work seamlessly. It is like an iPod or an iPhone, but just with a larger screen. And frankly, what this iPad has been built for is as an e-reader, to read a book. And you can see here I got Winnie the Pooh up on, and I'm just kind of turning the pages nice and simple. It's very, very simple to use. I think they're going to catch on. I didn't think they would at the beginning, Taz, but I do think they're going to catch on because I see students buying them. I was on vacation, I mentioned, in Aruba, and there were people, you know, with their iPads sitting there reading their books electronically by the pool. So I have a feeling it's the wave of the future.
Okay, well, it's being called a runaway success. We'll have to see how it does in Canada. We should also note that you can pre-order as of May 10th in the Canadian part of the world, and you can get your hot little hands on that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and that does it for Bontis on Business. Be sure to check out Nick's website at bontis.com.